Hi everyone, welcome back to the weekly politics show. I'm Councillor Premier with co-host Councillor Andrew Wood. So in this section, after the break, we're going to talk about Hartlepool, the local elections, and what they mean. So I'm going to go over to Andrew. Andrew, tell us what you make of the elections. I know I've been receiving phone calls, so I'm just going to make a caveat. I looked at the polls. I knew that those of us in the know knew that things weren't going to be that good, but surprisingly, I've been getting a lot of calls from Labour Party members, kind of ish, like, what does this mean, But Andrew, I'll let you kick off, sort of ish.
Yeah, so I woke up earlier this morning because I guess I was curious about what was happening with Hartlepool, because we expected the result about 4 o'clock. So stupidly, I woke up early expecting to see it, but it got delayed. But when it did come out, it was a shocker. So, Conservatives got 52% of the vote, or 15,000 votes, and Labour only got 29% of the vote and 8,000 votes. So, it wasn't even close. And I know there's been lots of discussions about the technicalities and about candidate selection, all the rest of it, but none of that would have made any difference. And then sort of in the Tees Valley mayoral election, Ben Houchen got 73% of the vote. And Tees Valley again is sort of red wall, sort of Labour. And just looking at the council election, so this is only after 61 of 143 councils have been declared. So it's not full picture yet, but Labour lost 164 councillors, Conservatives gained 155. And what's very interesting is actually the Green Party gained 30 councillors. So the Labour vote was going Conservative, maybe some Liberal Democrat, and some Green. And that's also going to be very interesting. And I think there's lots of arguments about it's the leader, but I think this is much more fundamental than that. I think this is a complete change in how we view politics and how people vote. And if you look at other European countries, a sort of centre-left party, with one or two exceptions, have done really badly over the last 10, 20 years. So I think this is systemic. And this does raise quite profound challenges for, the Labour Party. What is it for? Who is it for? Is Labour even the right name for the party? Because, who Labour are appealing to is currently not a big enough electoral coalition to win, especially if Labour have lost Scotland. And that I think the Conservatives have done a better job of kind of moving with that change in the electoral coalition, which is why they've been so successful in the red wall. And the question is whether Labour will follow and how will they follow. But I think this has been on the cards.
Yeah,
it's just getting worse and worse.
No, I think there's long-term trends. So I'm just going to put my disclosure in. So I was the general election agent in 2017 for Momentum, and if you do a Google search, you could find the story there. But one of the things is that we did put the campaign together, and it was a successful campaign. And the issue is you have to put an electoral coalition together. So every election, a political party will look at the base. So you have what they call your universe, your electoral universe. That's the terminology. And you have what you call your base. And then you have your target, to your winning target. So you got to make the differences. So you got to look in the electorate and see, where do I get the different bunch of voters to actually get that winning target. So every election you have that discussion. But there are interesting long-term trends which make it harder for Labour in certain areas, but easier for Labour in other areas. And the only analogy I could think of is what happened in American politics with the Democrat Party, where most of the votes were in the South, and the Republicans were in the north of the country. And then in the 60s, that slowly inversed. So by the 80s, and even now, all the votes from the Republicans are from the south of the country, where the Democrats are in former Republican areas in the north. So that's the way I see it. That's the kind of like long-term trends where I see like the North is going to eventually become like the American South, and the south of England is going to be like the American North. It's much more prosperous. It's much more urbanized. You've got university graduates, a higher proportion of university graduates than you would have in those northern towns. A lot of the reason is that a lot of the graduates in those northern towns, there are no jobs, so they move down to London and the southeast as well. So the demographics in those towns are much more elderly, whereas in London, like for example, Tower Hamlets, majority of our population is under the age of 40, I think, or 45.
It's 34.
So so you have that kind of trends, so to speak. But I do think that if you look below the surface, there are some interesting trends for a Labour or a left-wing party. One of the stats I've been looking at, and I was looking at the US, and I'm going to do comparisons in the UK, is traditionally what happened was like the urban centers were poor and the suburbs were kind of like much more rich or affluent. What's happened is poverty has increased over the last 10 years in the suburb areas, and you see that in terms of what's happened in Redbridge, for example, which wasn't a Labour council traditionally, which was seen as an affluent area, but it now has like really high child poverty rates in certain parts, and you've seen that trend all over London, but throughout throughout what would be termed the commuter towns and suburbia, that there is an increase in poverty sort of ish in those areas, which will make an inroad, which will allow sort of like a left-leaning political offer to basically make inroads. A lot of people are renting as well because of the high cost of housing in the southeast of England. So where people rent, they tend to be much more left-wing. Where people own their own houses, they tend to be much more right-wing in terms of their political thinking. So there are interesting trends, but the issue is it's up for each political party to basically exploit those kind of trends. It just seems Boris Johnson is a much better electoral campaigner than any of the Labour guys. You know, he took on Ken Livingstone and beat him twice. And he took on Corbyn, which Theresa May found very difficult to handle. He wasn't your traditional political opponent, and he took him on and he won. And now he's parking the tanks on Labour's lawn, so to speak. So Boris Johnson is a formidable campaigner, and he's attracting people like Ben Houchen and others to basically come in to the, and is it Andy Streeting as well in Birmingham as well,
Yeah.
who's they have, you know, who've done out of the box kind of really popular policies. So I think, you know, that we're in the age of populism, and I think the Conservative Party, in terms of its structures, allows those kind of mavericks to come through. That's how I see it from the outside. It could be different, Andrew, from your experience.
No, I think, you know, because the Conservative Party has kind of always been less ideological and more interested in power, is that they're more able to change quickly if you know the situation or the electoral maths require it. So they're now doing things which are not traditionally conservative because it works. So Ben Houchen is a good example. You know, he's doing things that you would have thought a Labour mayor would be doing, like nationalising the airport. And I think, you know, part of the problem for Labour is I think it's more sort of fixed in ideology. And I think in reality, as you was just saying, and I think the American analogy is a good one, is a Labour Party basically needs to not dominate the south of England. The problem with that is that, you know, it's going to have to compete with the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, because the only Green MP is in Brighton. So, you know, Labour Party needs to dominate southern England because it looks likely that, you know, they will continue to lose up north. But, you know, they'll retain Liverpool and some of the other big urban centres. So it's not going to be a complete loss in parts of Manchester. but the risk is, and there's also a risk for the Conservatives as well, is that they will lose seats in the southeast as people move away from London and start to swing the electorate. So it's almost like a race going on. Conservatives gaining in the north, Labour gaining in the south, as to who gets where. But I think realistically, I think at the next general election, I think it's more likely than not that the Conservatives will get re-elected unless they make a complete and utter hash of things, which is entirely possible. They're not the most competent of party at times, or if there's a major financial recession or depression, then I think everything is up in the air again. But if those two things don't happen, and the other thing we haven't mentioned is the boundary review will happen before the next general election, and that will give a small advantage to the Conservatives. It means more Labour seats in London, but I think nationally it gives them a small advantage. So I think on balance, things don't look good for Labour. But I've always believed is we need a fundamental realignment of UK politics, because I didn't think the two main political parties worked really well. And the only question, which was going to get smashed first, the Conservatives or Labour. And it now looks like Labour are the ones who are suffering the most. And therefore, that should force on them the most radical change in response.
Yeah. I think we're going to have dominate. Well, speaking to colleagues in the know, I think we're going to have domination of the national politics by the Conservative Party. They're going to set the agenda, which makes it much more interesting for us in local government. In opposition, for us to focus in local government, to showcase certain ideas, sort of ish, in local government, to say this is what we can do in national government. And I have seen a much more of a focus amongst Labour activists and thinkers within the movement to start thinking about local government. People are highlighting the Preston model or the Cleveland model. Community wealth. What do you do if manufacturing leaves an area? How do you basically generate wealth, etc.? So those kind of discussions are happening. I know Matthew Brown is releasing his book next week. I think on the Preston model. It's coming out on the 11th of May. I know I have to do a review on it. That's why. So the discussion, I think, is going to be much more on local government. And it's interesting to see whether that has an impact in terms of Tower Hamlets or London politics with the coming local elections coming up, and see what radical alternatives, because we do have to, as a political party, you have to make an attractive offer to the electorate. And if the electorate is rejecting the current offer, you need to go back and come up with something better. Do you see it a fundamental shift in the Conservative Party with this new economic populism, kind of ish, Andrew? Are we going to see this in Tower Hamlets as well? Are you guys going to be big spenders in Tower Hamlets? Are you going to nationalise Canary Wharf, for example? That's going to be quite popular.
I'm not a Conservative anymore, so I can't really speak about what they might do. But there's actually an argument that the best thing that Tower Hamlets Labour could do to help Labour nationally is do such a good job in Tower Hamlets that when people do leave this area, because we have lots of young people come to this area and then they generally move away, when they've got families to suburban areas, is they go into those suburban areas of saying, oh, Labour were really great in Tower Hamlets, and therefore I'll vote for Labour in my new area. And that's how you turn, safe Conservative seats in the southeast into Labour seats. But that means that Tower Hamlets Labour have to up their game and sort of really deliver, which ironically might encourage people to stay, whereas actually what you want them to do is to leave as Labour voters to go elsewhere. So.
Yeah, well, let's see what the impact is going to be. It'd be interesting to see whether Tower Hamlets Labour, including myself as part of it, come up with a much more of a radical offer and see what the counter offer is from the opposition in Tower Hamlets in light of what's happening in national politics, and see what happens. So we're going to go straight to another break. After the break, we're going to discuss Section 106. Section 106 money in Tower Hamlets. How much is there? Where is it? And where does it get spent? So Andrew and I are going to have a discussion, because if everybody keeps on asking, oh, you got 500 million pounds or something like that in some bank account somewhere. So we're going to just explain about the Section 106. So join us after the break. After the break, we're going to go talk about Section 106 in Tower Hamlets.